All right, everybody. It is just after 5 here on Tuesday, September 27th. We have a big game here this weekend. It's always a big game playing a coastal opponent, especially when we're crossing the border over into North Carolina. And a lot's going on right now in the Coastal Division. Virginia Tech is running away with the Coastal Division, sitting up top. So we decided to bring our resident ACC expert to the table here. Feels like it's 2007 again with Virginia Tech at the top of the Coastal here after that big win over Boston College. But in all seriousness, we're going to chat about the ACC. We're going to chat about Virginia Tech. We're going to chat about this Carolina game this weekend. And joining me today in Charlotte, you're in Charlotte, right, David? David Hale.
I'm in Charlotte, yeah.
Charlotte, North Carolina. So, David, welcome back to the Sons of Saturday. How you been, man?
I am good. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
And just for those who are tuning in for the first time, David covers the ACC for ESPN. He's been doing that for a while now. And third time on the show, I believe. I think the first time was like way back in COVID. But
oh, yeah. What do I get for a third time? Am I getting like a smoking jacket or something, a monogram smoking jacket?
I know. I think it's about time we sent you something. So yeah. We'll send you a link to our store and pick out something nice. I see.
I have a theory that all journalists, particularly sports journalists, are only in it for like the occasional free food or swag. Like that's the industry as a whole is not very upbeat. But if you get a free hot dog out of things every now and again, it's great.
I was gonna say it's all about the collection of trinkets along the way here. So, but yeah, welcome back. We're excited to have you. First of all, before we even dive into the ACC, I want to hear about your experience in Blacksburg. We know you were at the West Virginia Tech game this past Thursday night. Obviously, the result was not what we wanted, but we love hearing about whether it's journalists or fans or former players about your experience when you go to Virginia Tech.
Oh, I always loved going to Virginia Tech. So when I went to college at Delaware undergrad. And one of my best friends went to Virginia Tech. And so like once a year, we'd go down and hang out in Blacksburg. And my trips there are not like that anymore. I don't get blackout drunk at top of the stairs and, sleep on somebody's porch anymore, which is a shame because those are great times. But it is still always lovely to get out into the mountains. And especially I feel like that trip was sort of like this turning point where like it was real hot in Charlotte, like for months up to that point. Then I go up and have the nice cool weather where it was actually kind of chilly at night in Blacksburg. And then I came back and now it's like cold and truly fall in Charlotte again. So I'll credit Blacksburg for all of that. And I got to stay down on the field for Enter Sandman, which I don't think I'd actually seen in person since pre-COVID. So it's one of those things like, it's awesome and you see it on TV and it's awesome. But then if you don't do it for a little while, you kind of forget just how awesome it is. And my only complaint was this, though. I stayed down in the field to watch for the entrance, and then I went back up to the press box, and they'd already put away all the food, and I was starving for most of that game. So aside from that, though, everything was great.
All right. So note to self: David Hale. He needs a good snack. He needs to be fed.
Again, yes, exactly. My blood sugar gets too low. I start being mean on Twitter.
Yeah. So the crowd was great. The environment was great. What did you think of Justin Mutz leading the "Let's Go Hokies" chant in his?
Oh, he was very good. That was natural. I remember, I was like, this guy's good at this. Like, he's got a future in, I don't know, crowd leading, whatever that job is. But he was good at it. It became very naturally.
Yeah, Justin Mutz coming to a basketball arena near you this winter. So. The ACC after 4 weeks. Here we go again. The ACC is always crazy. We're coming off the heels of honestly, it's got to be one of the worst weekends that the Coastal has ever had. You
That's
got
a high bar or a low bar. I'm not sure which one. They've had some bad weekends.
I was going to say,
this was not a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. What were your takeaways? I know, Middle Tennessee. You got Syracuse beating Virginia. You got Duke and Georgia Tech going down. Virginia Tech loses, but generally, what were your main takeaways from another wild weekend in the ACC, specifically the Coastal getting beat down?
Well, I mean, the number one was just Miami getting boat raced because that wasn't even just a crazy upset, some things happen, special teams, whatever. No, Middle Tennessee was just markedly better than Miami in every phase of football, and the only explanation for that is just Miami didn't give a damn at all about playing that football game, which is, sadly not surprising because we've seen this out of Miami on an almost annual basis for the last 15 years. But that wasn't this the whole thing that Mario Cristobal was supposed to come in and fix, right? Like, you can only upgrade the talent so much in one offseason. But culture is a thing you're supposed to be able to impact more quickly. And that team just laid down. They weren't interested in playing. I mean, that's the bottom line. And then you go and bench your starting quarterback in the middle of that game, which, whether that was a necessary move or a move of desperation, there will be ripple effects of that. Like, that's just a brutal, brutal outcome. And you look back to last year. This was the point in the year where essentially everybody decided we're going to fire Manny Diaz. And it was not as bad as this is, in my opinion, right? They got boat raced by Alabama, though, and like they were in a game with App State and won. They didn't get boat raced by a group of 5 team. Like, it's just, if you're a Miami fan, like, you got to look at this and say, like, I didn't expect everything to be perfect, but it was supposed to be different, and that's the frustrating thing. So, I don't know. I look at it and I say, I'm not sure I am pretty sure there's not a great team in the Coastal. I think Miami still has enough talent that if this doesn't destroy the core of the team, then they have a chance. The upside is these last 2 games that they've lost were not ACC games. Doesn't affect them in the standings at all in that respect. Carolina just went to play a Notre Dame team that couldn't move the football at all for 3 weeks and then hangs, 42 on them. Like, I don't know how you fix this Carolina defense. Like, it's, again, you bring in Gene Chizik to at least make things look different, even if they're equally as bad, and they look exactly the same. Pitt, that's probably the class of the division right now, but I'm not excited about Pitt. Their O-line has woefully underperformed to this point. They're not going to get Rhode Island every week. And then the bottom half of the division, Georgia Tech is Georgia Tech. Duke has been surprisingly good, and I would not be surprised if they win a few games. I don't think they have a real shot at winning the division, but all of those teams that were putting Duke as a check mark in their schedule is like, well, that's a win. I don't know if that's going to be the case at this point. Virginia should be better than they are because that defense has gotten much better. Everything Tony Elliott said about scheme-wise, we got to be more balanced. He's right, and it's working out, except for the fact that for some reason, Brennan Armstrong and what was supposed to be an incredibly talented receiving corps have just forgotten how to play football. And then you got Virginia Tech, and you see things to like about this team, but it is a team that, to me, is still trying to figure out what in the heck its identity is going to be because they're not really great at anything at this point. And I get the sense, and this is really a thing felt like I saw a lot Thursday night, is Brent Pry moving some pieces around, trying different things. And it's like, is any of this going to work? It feels like a lot of trial and error. And right now it's been a lot of error and not a whole lot of decisive answers. That's a long-winded answer of the whole Coastal.
It's long-winded because it has to be long-winded because that's just what we love about this division. If you were to give the Coastal Division right now kind of just a theme or a phrase or a headline, what would you say it is? Because it for me it would be disarray, but I'd love to hear kind of your elevator Coastal Division after 4 weeks.
It feels like a race to mediocrity to me. Like, it is like there are clearly some bad teams. I don't think that any of these teams have the pieces to be as good as probably the top 3 or 4 teams in the Atlantic right now, unless I'm woefully underappreciating Pittsburgh. But I think between Pitt, Virginia Tech, Duke, Miami, and Carolina, 1 or 2 of them has to sort of regress or progress to the mean at this point. And like, if you can just get to like markedly above average, like that's probably going to win you the division. But all of them have these fatal flaws baked in, and you just wonder, like, are any of them capable of doing that? Like, you like Duke right now almost because they're the ones who, compared to expectations, are doing the best, but that's still not a particularly talented team. Or you look at Carolina and you say like Drake May and Josh Downs, and they can probably put 35 on anybody, and aren't they good? Yeah, but they can't get out of their own way on defense. And again, you just don't get boat raced by Middle Tennessee if you're that good of a football team like Miami. So I just look at it and I say there's teams that have pieces there. But at this point, is anyone going to put those pieces together enough to, again, not be great, but just be above average?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I think you nailed it there. Is like there's these question marks that are fixable question marks. There should be fixable question marks that every single school in this conference or every single school in this division has some significant bright spots on one side of the ball or one area of the team. And then, the rest is really just significantly bringing it down. But I want to do a fun exercise here and talk about each team in the Coastal Division, and David Hale make the case on how each team in the Coastal can win the division.
All right, this should be fun. All right, are you gonna go in some sort of order for this, or we're gonna extemporaneously?
Let's take it from. I guess we could take it from the current standings. We could start with Virginia Tech being 1-0.
The defense is good, right? The defense is good enough that they should be able to stay in games. They're not deep, though. And what they need to have happen is figure out some way to more consistently run the football, both in terms of just figuring out some offensive balance, but also chewing up some clock so your defense isn't out on the field as much as they were against West Virginia, because what you'll get is like a second half that looks a lot like that West Virginia game where they're just not deep enough on defense to play at the level that they need to play to win. But there's some pieces on the defensive side of the ball. This might be the most talent deficient Virginia Tech offense I can remember in a while. But you look around the league, and particularly just on this side of the league, the offensive line play has not been great up and down. So maybe you make a little tweak here and there and things start to click. If the offensive line can come together and they can get a little bit of a push to move the football, they're going to be in some football games. And there's not another great team, as I said, so they got a shot. But you got to run the football better. And that's, if they can't do that, I don't think they've got the depth to stay in this.
All right, let's move a couple hours north to UVA.
I think they might be sort of the sneakiest possible team that we're not overly excited about that could be good. Just because I've seen it from these guys before, right? It's not can Brennan Armstrong be a good quarterback? No, we've seen it. He is a good quarterback. He's just playing like total crap right now. So the other parts of Virginia that we were worried about, the O-line has not been great, clearly, but that again was something that we knew going into the season was going to have to happen. But the wide receivers are still talented. Got my dog coming in here. The defense has been much better. I think a lot of what Tony Elliott has talked about wanting to do this season has made sense. And I put this on Twitter earlier today, but you look at their combined win probability added or expected points added, offense plus defense, and they're better this year than they were last year. Now they were a 6-6 team last year. I don't think they want to be that again, but hell, 7-5 might win this division. Who knows?
Yeah, and I saw those notes on Twitter about the improvements that they've made year over year, because they were 2-2 last year as well, and they're playing more physical. They're playing tougher on defense, specifically that defensive line. Okay, let's talk about Carolina.
I mean, we'll talk, I'm sure, more about this game. I'm excited about this game because this is the biggest flaw for Virginia Tech and the biggest flaw at North Carolina are going to meet up at exactly the same spot here, because Virginia Tech hasn't run the ball. North Carolina can't stop the run. If they can't do it, if Carolina can't do that this week, I just don't know who they do this against. They had an extra bye week to prepare for Notre Dame. It made no difference at all for a Notre Dame team that was struggling offensively. I mean, if Carolina's going to win it, it's because Drake May is going to be in the Heisman conversation. That's the answer, because they're going to have to be so damn good offensively that they can win games like that App State game. And it's like, hey, 64-62, congratulations, you're atop the Coastal.
And then we'll round it out here with Miami, Duke, Georgia Tech, and then we'll finish with Pitt.
Miami, just like get your head out of your ass a little bit. Like they don't have the receiving core to beat teams over the top. I don't know that they have the attitude to beat teams physically. I don't know what their identity is. I just don't. And if they're not interested, if they're not invested, I don't know how they're going to win a lot of games. I know I wouldn't want to be the one sitting in a film room after last week with Mario Cristobal and hearing what he has to say about that, though. So I'm not writing them off yet. Everybody gets to have a bad week. I think they have the talent to still be the best in this division. So, but you got to get Van Dyke on the field. You can't have a QB controversy. You've got to figure out some chemistry with the receivers. You got to get Xavier Restrepo healthy. Those things, I think, will give them an opportunity to win. Duke is, I think, the team that can win it if nobody else decides they want to win it. It's sort of like, the guy that gets the girl at the end of the night because every other guy in the bar has passed out drunk. Like, that's Duke right now. And I could see that happening. Georgia Tech, maybe Jeff Collins was the problem the whole time. Maybe we just were really undervaluating how much everyone in that room hated him, and now they're going to go on a winning streak. But I don't see that happening. And then you get to Pitt. And to me, they're the wild card because I think they probably are the team that has the most pieces in place. They're obviously the defending ACC champions. This is a team that I think wants to be more balanced than they were with Mark Whipple calling plays and Kenny Pickett at quarterback, but they've not really shown a consistent ability to do that. They're good at receiver, but they don't have that Jordan Addison game breaker type that they had last year. They're really good up front on defense. The offensive line, which returned 5 starters from last year, has looked like a mess, and I don't understand that. They're small on the back end, so teams that they're going to play that can really challenge them downfield, I think they're going to run into some issues as they did against West Virginia and Tennessee. Again, it is a team that I look at Pitt and I say they're okay everywhere and not terrible anywhere. And that might be the right formula, is just being good enough everywhere.
It's the race to mediocrity. So it's all about the okayest team.
That's right.
There's really no way around it. The ACC's been pretty weak this year out of conference, minus that Florida State win, against LSU and the Carolina win against App State. It's been tough. And as far as the future of the ACC, what would you say is, the general feeling about the future and any type of, any type of future that you might see unfolding in the name of conference realignment? What is the general feel from you, early on in the season here?
That's a great question. The thing that people keep telling me is that the ACC is not in a rush to do anything. And I think they mean that in a positive sense, and that because of the grant of rights and because of where they are in the grand scheme of things right now, that there's probably not an answer that puts them on par with the SEC and Big Ten financially, and they're not really at risk of falling any below where those other 2 leagues are after they lose their marquee teams. So they're in this purgatory that they have signed a contract to be in through 2036. And the luxury of that is it affords you some time to figure some things out and see how the world shakes out. They also have a strong relationship with ESPN, which I think is genuinely invested in seeing the ACC be successful because, frankly, it is a valuable asset to ESPN right now. But ESPN is not looking to do them any favors either. They're not going to just hand them a check just to be nice. And one of the things that I think there's a few different ways that this can go. I think one is the league's play markedly improves over the next 2 to 3 years, and teams like Miami and Florida State and Virginia Tech become genuine national players on the big stage again, and they can bring ratings data to ESPN and say, like, look, we need to reopen or rediscuss contract terms. We can't survive with the money that we're getting, but we are bringing this benefit to you financially via ratings. So what can we do here? I think it's a possibility, right? I don't know that it's likely, but it's a possibility. I think there's a possibility that they decide we're going to grow. And what could that look like? I have talked to enough people who have said, like, there's really not a team out there short of Notre Dame that markedly moves the needle financially. So you could go add West Virginia, or you could go add Houston, and it might add $1 million a year to everybody's pocketbook, maybe. And even that might be a stretch. But is there an incentive to do that for such a little return? I don't know. I think the other thing, and I don't know how many folks saw the story that the Raleigh News and Observer had the other day, where they had gotten a hold of some text messages from Bubba Cunningham, the AD at North Carolina, where he sort of, this is their texts from June, right after UCLA and USC announced they're moving, and he sort of put the idea out there that, like, well, what if we grew a lot? What if we just merged with those other two Power 5 leagues and we became like a 36-team super league with tiers of divisions and disequal revenue and stuff like that? Like, could that work? It could. I think there's some upside to doing something like this. Number one, it firmly establishes you as the clear number 3 and something different than those other two. It gives you it gives people a reason to say, I'm interested in the ACC. That has nothing to do with anything other than, like, you put together something different. 2, because you have added a ton of teams and completely restructured the league, it gives you the opportunity to go to the ESPN and say, like, well, now we definitely have to renegotiate this contract. We're a completely different business entity now. 3, and this was a little bit lost in one of the quotes that was in that News and Observer story from the text messages from Bubba Cunningham, is if you effectively ceased to be the ACC because you merged with these two other companies, for lack of a better term, to create a third kind of mega company, is there a way you could maybe boot some of the teams that have just been kind of tagging along from here? That's in the mix too. I think all of those things are very long shots right now, though. I think perhaps the most likely outcome is that we get by for another 2 to 3 years, because most of these media deals, these big contracts and stuff, are not going to start showing real money for the Big Ten and SEC for another 2 to 3 years. So we scoot by as is for another 2 to 3 years. And then somebody, whether it's Clemson or North Carolina or Florida State or somebody, gets a lawyer who says, like, yeah, I think we can challenge the grant of rights. Let's go to court. And once that happens, I think the dominoes can start falling pretty quickly. So I think those are your 3 options. I think the one that, if you're Jim Phillips, the one you'd most like to see is the league just starts playing better and becoming more valuable. I think if you're an AD or a school president in one of those schools that thinks they have a home in the SEC or Big Ten, you're just waiting to find the right lawyer right now. And then there's a possibility that we find some sort of hybrid in between all of that.
To your point about Jim Phillips hoping that the ACC plays better, a lot of that has to do with the Coastal Division and these new coaches being able to get a couple of years. And a lot of these programs are in rebuilds, such as Virginia Tech. How long is Mac Brown going to be at North Carolina? That's another question. But the Atlantic Division is definitely carrying their weight, and they're eating the bigger pieces of the pie, because they're definitely showing out here this year thus far. But appreciate that answer, David. So as far as talking about Virginia Tech and what we have seen so far, you were there at the game up in the press box after Enter Sandman, but as far as takeaways from this West Virginia game, I know that you tweeted earlier, or I guess after the game, Brent Pry harped on the need for Virginia Tech's offensive line to get some push up front this week. Hokies had 30 designed runs that went for a loss or no gain entering tonight, which is the most in Power 5. And then you listed out a lot of the runs that went for 2 yards, -1 yard, 0 yards. And then you tweeted out some emojis. One of them was the water gun to the foot, and then one of them was a guy looking like he was getting hit by a train.
Yeah, it felt appropriate in the moment.
Yeah, I felt the same way. So what, I guess, how does one make sense of Virginia Tech's offensive line and establishing the run game? Virginia Tech in pass protection is definitely serviceable. We were talking about that on the Post West Virginia podcast. Whereas the run game is just ineffective. And you got a guy like Joe Rudolph, who is known for having extremely effective offensive line play. how does one make sense of that? How does one, I guess, like, what are your initial thoughts on just seeing it firsthand?
Yeah, so I just looked this up just to see what the numbers are now. So they've had 36 out of 132 designed runs were stopped for loss or no gain. That's 122nd out of 131 FBS teams. And when you consider the schedule hasn't been particularly demanding, that's frustrating. And you watched, particularly that first half. It's 1 yard run, 2 yard run, tackle for a loss, 1 yard run. Like, you need something to change the dynamic on offense. And, to Virginia Tech's credit, I got the sense like they weren't abandoning the run. They were trying to stick with it and until they just couldn't anymore. But Grant Wells, I think, has some upside. And he's shown some mobility in the pocket. He's shown the ability to run himself. And he was probably their best asset on the ground in that West Virginia game. And he's got an arm that can beat you downfield if he can, get any sort of defense to respect the run game to open up some of those downfield passes a little bit more. But there's just nothing else there. It's essentially like snap the ball to Grant Wells and say, like, please try to figure out something to do here. And it's just not a recipe for winning very many football games. And moreover, look, again, I don't know how many of the younger guys will eventually turn into legitimate, pro potential guys. But you look at the offensive depth chart right now, and I'm not sure there's a guy you circle and you say, like, that's an NFL guy. Like, and it's been a long time since that's been Virginia Tech, even during some of the lean years. Even, last year you could look at a couple of the guys on that O-line and clearly they were NFL caliber guys. So it is, I think you kind of almost have to understand that there's probably a ceiling into how much they're going to be able to do. They're below that ceiling at this point, to be sure. And the run blocking has got to get better. And whether you have to start utilizing Wells as a runner more to get him out of the pocket and start forcing defenses to adjust, or start using more in like the screen game and stuff like that, to just try and do something different to open that up. I think you got to figure out something that changes that dynamic. But the fact of the matter is, I'm just not sure they can be great at that or even very good at that in the short term. This is a matter of restockpiling offensive talent, and they're just not good. It reminded me a lot, and I spent for whatever terrible masochistic reason a lot of time talking to Dave Clawson back in like 2013 and 14 when he was first took over at Wake Forest, and that reminds me a lot of this Virginia Tech team, and they're pretty solid on the defensive side, but just a black hole in the offense. And I don't think Virginia Tech is nearly as talent deprived as that Wake Forest team was. And of course, everybody remembers the Frank Beamer meme. But that Wake Forest team had nobody. This isn't that bad, but it is a similar thing. And what I think Dave Clawson was very smart in doing was like, you know what, we're going to struggle through this, right? But we're going to let guys grow up the hard way. They're going to get better because of it. And in 2 or 3 years, we're going to be in a position to really succeed. And I think that's the way you got to do it. Now, that was also a decade ago when you couldn't just go in the transfer portal and add 10 guys if you needed them. But I think if you ask Brent Pry, you look at like Florida State and what Mike Norvell had to do there was he had to go into the transfer portal. There was so much pressure to win, and he had nothing there, and he had to do it. And he did a really good job of it so far. I don't think that's how Brent Pry wants to build this, though. And maybe 1 or 2 guys could come in and help you fill a gap if you think you're close. But to me, I think you almost have to just say, like, if we're taking baby steps right now, if maybe the results aren't always going to show up in the win-loss column, like, we got to figure out a different way of measuring success here. And I think that's the smarter investment.
I'm really glad you brought that up. So you made some great comparisons there. One to Dave Clawson, as far as this team is that Wake Forest team, are very similar. And then talking about the portal and how Mike Norvell was able to, utilize it to his advantage. And it seems like there's definitely been a talking point and a topic in Virginia Tech Twitter, just Hokie Nation in general, of the cupboard was bare. Coach Pry's offense, has nothing there as far as from a talent perspective. The defense has a lot of talent. Is there as much depth on the defense? No, but the defense has enough talent to keep us in ball games. It's up to the offense to win us the games, and the offense, doesn't have that much talent. my question is, I guess, definitely interested to hear your thoughts on the portal versus establishing relationships in Virginia and getting those 3-4 year guys. And if that can be an effective way to win in 2022 and beyond, because, Mike Norvell had so much pressure on him as far as winning is so important in the short term to Virginia Tech fans and to football fans in general. But do you think that Coach Pry should have spent a little bit more time in the portal just for this first year to kind of start off on the right foot?
That's a good question. So there's two things about Virginia Tech that I think are sort of unique to what they're trying to do. On the one hand, I think because you don't have sort of that clear, established veteran like leadership contingent on the offensive side in that locker room, there's an upside to bringing in some proven winners from another place and saying, like, you've been in a good culture, help us build this here. But you also have to understand who's in the transfer portal. I mean, usually it's guys who weren't particularly happy where they were. So I don't know that there's even a ton of those guys. Like Florida State got that with Jermaine Johnson last year, and it just so happened you brought in a guy who was at Georgia and was the third best defensive lineman in the country, but also the third best defensive lineman on his own team. Like, that's pretty much what he was. So, like, there's not a lot of those guys there. So I don't know that there's even, like, these guys that are in the portal that would come in and both be a benefit to you on the field, be there for more than a year to help you build, and have sort of that, be the sort of culture guys that you need. And the other thing is, I think that you can make whatever criticisms you want to make about Justin Fuente, but the one that I think sticks, and the one that has probably frustrated Virginia Tech fans the most, is his recruiting and how he handled not just recruiting at large, but particularly recruiting in Virginia and the key areas of Virginia that Frank Beamer, during the heyday of Virginia Tech, used to dominate. And he just he didn't really go down into Norfolk and Tidewater and own that area the way that Beamer did during his best years. He was very invested in going and getting guys from from his sort of comfort zone in the Midwest and Texas. And it didn't play well. And it didn't play well with high school coaches in that area. It didn't play well with high school athletes in Virginia. It didn't play well with some of the sort of middleman movers and shakers in the recruiting game. And I think that that's a bridge you have to rebuild at all costs. To me, that is not about 2022 or 2023. That is about sustainability of Virginia Tech for the future. And so, yeah, there's nothing wrong with going and adding 2 or 3 guys to the transfer portal. But if you're investing in outsiders just to try and win now, I mean, that's more or less the cardinal sin that Justin Fuente did too. So I think that's the risk you run in going too heavily in that direction.
Right, exactly. And I think it's all about keeping a balance of getting the right guys from the portal, but ultimately Coach Pry has made his focus of rebuilding what was lost in Virginia and, that 6-hour radius of Blacksburg that he's talked about, for Virginia Tech recruiting. So Carolina, I got to tell you,
Carolina, on a week where there's going to be a hurricane, what could be better?
I got to tell you, David, and we're going to do Billy Ray and I are going to jump on and do a quick preview podcast for the game a little more in depth too. But we do not like Carolina. We are. I know you're not allowed to say anything bad about Carolina because of your job, but I'm sure you're biting your tongue over there. But we are excited for this game because I feel like, at least, and Virginia Tech fans, kind of in my era, have felt that Virginia Tech and Carolina have had some great games over the past, 6-7 years, and that it is a bit of a rivalry where whether Carolina wants to admit it or not, like I want to say that Carolina is a football rivalry for Virginia Tech. Can you break that down for me? Do you have any thoughts on that? Because, Carolina is this big brand. They got, 3 other Power 5 schools in their state. They got App State in there. Everyone hates Carolina, but make the case for the Virginia Tech North Carolina rivalry, if there is one. Be honest with me.
So first of all, let me just say that when the conferences, they got rid of the conferences and they come up with your 3 permanent rivals, and who knows if the ACC is even still around long enough to go through all of that. But the 2 biggest disappointments for me were not having Virginia Tech Miami and not having Virginia Tech Carolina, because my wonderful colleague Andrea Adelson, who is a Florida native and used to cover Miami back in her early days of reporting, which, I don't want to make her sound old. That was probably like 2 years ago, but still, like, she loves the Virginia Tech Miami rivalry. And I, when I first got to Charlotte and I got to cover some of those games in like 2013, 14, 15, and Carolina like ruining Beamer's going away party. And, then, or no, well, they didn't. They thought they were going to, and then they didn't. And then there was the hurricane game and all of this stuff. Whatever. This is a abstract metric, if you will. And I know Twitter is not real life, but like the most vitriol on Twitter among fan bases for me, I think number one is Florida State, Miami. Well, really Miami versus just anyone who has spoken to someone at Miami. They're just angry people. But Miami, Florida State is probably number one. Carolina and NC State is probably number two. And then I think there's a good case to say Virginia Tech and Carolina is number three. And I think part of it is just because like there's not like a ton of commonality between the two. It's not like husbands and wives that went to each school or married to each other, whatever, like the way that you get with like, UVA and Virginia Tech or Carolina and State. But like, it's like they both went to these schools and then all moved to like DC or Charlotte together. And so they're like, they don't even have like the inherent like love for each other as human beings. They're just like neighbors who actually friggin' hate each other. And so the animosity can fully simmer without any sort of like humanity underneath of it. That's just my pet theory on this. But yes, I would argue that this is a great rivalry and vastly underappreciated.
Great. That's all I wanted to hear, because I started the UNC Hate Week on Twitter a little early. I actually was tweeting at them the day of the West Virginia game, so maybe I should have stayed more focused. But,
timing is everything.
A lot of it was centered around here, and that there was going to be a little rain coming up the Eastern Seaboard.
So good.
Going into the quote tweets and seeing everyone, trying to tag the athletic director, cancel the game, move the game. And it's like, guys, are we really going to do this? Like, are you kidding me? So, when I think of Carolina, I'm just like, guys, like, I got this sun in my face. Guys, like, we can't even fill a stadium. Your fans, like, do they even like football? They're arguing for traveling and double dribble calls out there on the gridiron. So, for me, it's a big rivalry. No matter what Carolina thinks, this is a rivalry, especially, they have been eating our lunch in the recruiting territory over the past few years too, which we need to get back here. But I just have a couple quick questions for you, David, about this game, and then we'll get into a few letters from the lunch pail, see what we have time for. But two questions about Carolina. One, what level of heat does Mac Brown have on his hot seat at this point, if any?
I think in my mind, there's no chance that they're going to fire him in almost any circumstance. But what it might be is, Mac, it's been great. Why don't we move you into sort of an administrative role? You can still have your fingerprints on the football program, but we went 4-8, and you're getting up there a little bit. I think it's time for Trent, like, sort of gradually, gracefully kind of move him to more of a figurehead role elsewhere and turn the day-to-day operations over to somebody else. I think that's the more likely scenario. But look, the fact of the matter is I've spent some time around Mac. He's pretty energetic and spry for his age. I have a hard time pinning the struggles on him. Like, I don't look at these games and say, like, that's a fundamental flaw of head coaching right there. He's been getting, as you noted, killing it on the recruiting trail compared to what Carolina has typically done. What's shocking to me is the lack of development of these recruits. Like, you have brought in top 20 classes for 4 straight years, and where's it gotten you? Because they're regressing. And particularly on the defensive side of the ball, that I don't understand it. I mean, you've got guys that should be, Miles Murphy should be an all ACC caliber guy. Tony Grimes should be an all ACC caliber guy. Like, it doesn't make sense that these guys are not growing. So to me, I don't know what the answer is on that, because they've already changed defensive coordinators. Like, you can't really do that again. I do think if you're Carolina, it's sort of a little bit like Nebraska. Like, you got to be careful what you wish for. Like, 7-6 was a bad season for you. You fired your coach. All right, let's see what happens next. Because I mean, Lord knows, Carolina, the bottom is low at Carolina when things go real bad too.
I will be making the trip up from Charlotte this weekend. We'll see if I'm going Friday night or Saturday, depending on how rainy it actually is. But we got a couple over-unders for you here, submitted by our friend Grant Watson. So, David, first one, we got 3. Hokies total yards, 330.
Ooh. Over. I'm going to go over. I feel like that defense, the NC State or UNC's defense has got to show me something before I say something that low. Like, I'm not saying Virginia Tech is great offensively, but they can hit 350 against the defense at Carolina that, couldn't stop my grandmother at this point.
UNC passing yards, 265.
Oh, I'll take the over on that for sure. I think I'm sold on Drake May. I'm sorry that this is a Virginia Tech podcast, but I can't say anything bad about Drake May at this point.
Drake May is doing a great job. And then Grant Wells passing yards, 250.
I think it's going to be right around the number. I think I'll probably say the under, but I don't believe it by a lot. But I do think one of the things you'll see is Grant Wells is going to run the ball a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised to see him with somewhere in like the 75 to 80 yards of rushing range. And then you tack on another 230, 240 yards passing, and maybe we get to a pretty good number there.
All right. Could be a good day for Grant. All right, so we'll take those and we'll jump into keys to the game and a score prediction.
Again, I mean, it comes down to me to the line of scrimmage. Virginia Tech's offensive line, which has been bad, at least in terms of run blocking, versus UNC defensive front that has been really bad at pretty much everything they're doing. They haven't gotten after the quarterback. They haven't stopped the run. Something's got to give there. I think I probably am picking Carolina just because I think that they've got enough. They can score, and they're not only going to score. The weather. Let me take a step back. The weather could have some say in this, but the tempo that they want to run tests the defensive depth for Virginia Tech. I am a Drake May buyer. They're pretty deep at receiver. They've shown a good ability to run the football this year. I think Carolina can, regardless of the weather, put 30 on the board. I'm not sure if Virginia Tech can do that or not. I think if they're going to do it against anybody, this is probably the team to do it against. I'm just not sure I'm ready to buy in yet. So I'll go Carolina. I'll say 32-24 or something like that.
I was going to say, we have not eclipsed the 30-point. The 30 burger has not been eclipsed yet. So hopefully we can get there. But I don't even know if we'll get to the 30 burger this season, to be honest with you. But,
it'll happen eventually. I feel good about it because mostly eventually somebody's just going to get bored down the stretch and say, like, go ahead. All right.
So we'll do a few letters from the lunch pail here, David, and then we'll get you on your way. So I actually submitted this one. What stadium will be the emptiest this weekend due to Hurricane Ian?
Oh, great question. All right, hang on. I got to pull up. Do I have time here to pull up the ACC schedule so that I can make a firm guess on this? It won't be Clemson because those people will go out absolutely regardless of what the weather is like. I mean, it's not going to rain at Boston College, but I would submit that's probably your answer. Yeah, I'm going to say, well, Duke's got a sellout for this one, don't they? I think, again, my answer is probably Boston College, but then I would say maybe Florida State fans are going to be excited. I think they come out. Syracuse, Clemson. Yeah, I mean, I will say this. I think the answer is sadly still North Carolina, maybe, but I don't. It's just because that's a wine and cheese crowd. They're going to want to watch the game from more of a plush, indoor, comfortable environment, and just don't let me saying that leak out anywhere beyond this. That's just between us.
There you go. That's the reason I asked the question, David. So
I knew where you were getting at. I was not going to let you have it, and then I just couldn't. I tried to walk all the way around it and came right back to where we started.
There you go. And then Steve Bryce, this is a Virginia Tech question. David, in all your years of covering Tech, including the Beamer years where we were treading water, did you ever think the program would get so bad where people believe it's below JMU or Liberty in 2022? This is dark. Bonus question. What are the two biggest factors you believe for the decline, and can Tech ever recover? I guess
ever is a long time.
Dude, Kansas is 4-0. Come on, Steve.
Yeah, Kansas is 4-0. Anything is possible. I think part of the problem, and I'm not even going to say it was necessarily a mistake, but part of the problem is that when you let a head coach sort of twist in the wind for an extra year when most of the fan base has decided it's over, it leaves you, I think, really behind the eight ball when you ultimately make the change, because you've lost guys to the portal, the recruiting, it gets in dangerous territory, the energy gets to an all-time low. It puts you behind the name. And you see why schools would rather make too quick of a move than too late of a move. I don't know if that's always the right answer, but I think there's some truth in that. Again, I mean, I think Fuente did some good things while he was a coach there, and I like him personally, but the recruiting was a problem. There is so much less talent on this roster than even. I mean, you look at the last year of Beamer was a super talented roster that just couldn't win enough games, and that's why when Fuente came in and does some better X's and O's stuff with the talent, they were good. He just could not keep the talent coming back in. I think the talent fixes itself in the long term, because the beauty of Brent Pry is he's a really good recruiter. He knows Virginia Tech. He is 100% bought in on selling the Hokies and the vision that he has. That stuff all matters. My guess is it's probably 2 to 3 years before you really see the fruits of all of that labor. But I would be a long-term buyer right now. I don't expect that to show a lot of return on investment this season, though.
We're in it for the long haul. We are in it for the long haul. We bought it. The dip.
The beauty is it's still fun to go out to Lane Stadium and have a few beers and hear Enter Sandman, and at least watch the first half of a competitive game. What happens from there is nobody's business.
Oh boy. All right, I'm going to read two more and then ask you one more question, David. So Chris Gibbons says, with this being the final year of the Coastal Division, will we see the Coastal Division sent off the way it was meant to be, with a 7-way tie? I don't think anything would be better than that. And I think
it would be the absolute greatest. The odds are still a long shot, but I will say it's more likely than what I thought, a month ago. Like, Duke is frisky. This could happen. Some of the better teams are not so good. Georgia Tech's going to be the fly in the ointment, because they got to figure some shit out quick if we're going to all get to 4-4. But boy, it would just be a thing of beauty for it to happen. It is the only way. Like, if we are living in a simulation, as I believe we are, a computer simulation, like, I hope that the designers of the algorithm that is our existence all would know, like, this is the only possible way for it to end.
And how excitement would that make your job and Andrea's job?
I might just have to leave on a high note and just be like, that's it, everybody. It's been blast.
You're entering the transfer portal. Here's another one. Virginia Tech is 1-0 in Hurricane games where the storm begins with the letter I. Shout out to Hurricane Isabel, Texas A&M win in 2003. We got Ian coming in this week. And then the last question here, David, from Billy Ray Mitchell. Who would be your first-round pick to get the Georgia Tech job if you are a Yellow Jacket fan, and why is it prime time?
I will say I'm very torn on Dion, because on one hand, the interest level in Georgia Tech would skyrocket and my job would become so easy. On the other hand, he would have an expectation that I would address him as Coach Prime, and I just refuse to do it. So it's going to blow up and be a problem at some point. I would not argue if Georgia Tech wanted to roll the dice and see what happened with that. But they got to be all in, man. If they're going to do it, you got to put Deion in a position to succeed the Deion way. And I think there's just going to be a lot of people very uncomfortable with that there. To me, if you're asking who should you hire, if I was the AD, which, I mean, who knows? I haven't checked my phone in a while. I might be soon. I mean, they don't have one. So I would hire Jamie Chadwell. And I know he is sort of like personality-wise probably the inverse of like the ATL cool guy. But he is sort of like Paul Johnson in a modern era. And what he's done at Coastal is incredibly impressive. It's a super fun offense to watch. I think he could do that. It would translate, I think. And, with the option that Paul Johnson ran, it was always sort of like, well, every 5 or 6 years, we're going to win 10 or 11 games and it's going to be awesome. But that's the ceiling. And the floor is also like 6 games. We won't ever lose more than 6 games. So if you're comfortable living in that world, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think with Chadwell's offense, maybe it even gets you a little bit higher on the ceiling than that. Or at least it's more interesting anyway. So that's who I'd hire. But if they want to go and hire Deion, I'll look forward to him cursing me out on a YouTube video soon because I refuse to call him Coach Prime.
Oh man, that really tees up the battle of the Texts to become the Pry versus Prime time type match. Yeah, Jamie Chadwell. Keep him at the top of your big board, Yellow Jacket fans. David Hale, ladies and gentlemen. David, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you coming back, and enjoy the games this weekend. Stay dry, and
right back at you.
And enjoy dinner, whatever's on the menu for the Sons of Snacking.
It's great point. I have no idea. We'll find out. My guess is probably Arby's. Feels like an Arby's night.